The US Army must rethink the tactics of using tanks in modern warfare, which is undergoing radical changes due to the emergence of attack drones in infantry weapons, writes former US Special Forces non-commissioned officer Steve Balestrieri on the pages of 1945. As of today, the US Army has about 4,650 tanks, half of which are in reserve. Unlike most countries in the world, the US Army currently operates only one type of tank, albeit in several modifications, the M1 Abrams. Balestrieri admits that against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, where both sides have lost many tanks to man-portable anti-tank missiles and kamikaze drones, there are loud statements about the end of the tank era. At the same time, the American M1 Abrams and German Leopards, which are in service with the Ukrainian armed forces, are no exception. However, the author of the publication believes that it is too early to write off the tanks. However, he notes that the astronomical losses of the Russians in armored vehicles are explained not only by the dexterity of the Ukrainian infantry, but also by the gross errors of the Russians. In this context, he recalls the habit of the occupiers to drive tanks in large columns, making them a convenient target for the Ukrainians. The US and NATO use armored vehicles in combined arms combat, supported by infantry, artillery and air power. Their firepower and mobility remain devastating. Combined arms warfare is complex and requires a lot of training to master, Balestrieri writes. At the same time, the military expert admits that on the modern battlefield, tanks should preferably be a little smaller, lighter, faster and easier to use. And although anti-tank weapons have become extremely effective today, the next generation of armored vehicles will already have protection and countermeasures to protect against anti-tank missiles and drones. The new tanks of the future will have more barbecues to counter drones. They will have lasers and other weapons to shoot down drones and missiles on approach. They will have standard electronic warfare systems to jam UAVs, Balestrieri believes. So how many tanks does the army need? They need new armor, but what about the 4,650 current main battle tanks? They're still going to be used for now. So right now the US Army has too many tanks and too few tanks. He concludes, as media wrote, after 3 years of a full-scale war in Ukraine, the intensity of fighting on the front has not abated, but the Russians have begun to run out of armored vehicles. In particular, the aggressor is using fewer and fewer T-72 tanks, which were the basis of its tank fleet. However, for Ukraine, the losses of armored vehicles were also tangible and painful, especially in the Kursk direction, where the losses of combat equipment of both sides were almost equal. Hundreds of Abrams tanks could be sent to Ukraine if the US renews its tank base.
In a joint military operation with the United States, 17 alleged members of the Tren de Aragua and MS-13 gangs were transferred from the U.S. to the high-security prison in Tecoluca, El Salvador. This operation is another step in the fight against terrorism and organized crime, President Nayib Bukele posted on X. According to Associated Press, the deportations took place despite U.S. District Judge Brian E. Murphy temporarily blocking the Trump administration Friday from deporting people who have exhausted legal appeals to countries other than their own without first being allowed to argue that it would jeopardize their safety. On Wednesday, U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem visited the terrorism confinement center where Venezuelans who the Trump administration alleges are gang members have been held since their removal from the United States. Noem's trip to the prison, where inmates are packed into cells and never allowed outside, comes as the Trump administration seeks to show it is deporting people it describes as the worst of the worst. The Trump administration is arguing in federal court that it was justified in sending the Venezuelans to El Salvador, while activists say officials have sent them to a prison rife with human rights abuses while presenting little evidence that they were part of the Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang. The Venezuelans were removed from the U.S. this month after Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 and said the U.S. was being invaded by the Tren de Aragua gang. The Alien Enemies Act gives the president wartime powers and allows non-citizens to be deported without the opportunity to go before an immigration or federal court judge. A central outstanding question about the deportees' status is when and how they could ever be released from the prison, as they are not serving sentences. The Trump administration hasn't identified who was deported or provided evidence that they're gang members.
Our top focus in fine print: Russia has unleashed a deadly attack on Ukraine. 3 people have died in the central Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, while 1 person died in a drone attack on Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces are retaliating with strikes in the Belgorod region. Over 200 combat clashes erupted on the front lines as both the nations accuse each other of violating a fragile ceasefire. Our next story takes a closer look at the battlefield. Take a look.
The conflict between Russia and Ukraine intensifies by the hour. Ukraine's defense forces have been repelling Russian attacks along the entire front line, with the most intense fighting on the Pokrovsk and Lyman fronts. Ukrainian military says a total of 216 combat clashes across the front lines have taken place. Russian forces are intensifying their assaults in this eastern region, aiming to cut off Ukrainian supply lines and gain a strategic advantage. Russian forces are also relentlessly targeting Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, with a barrage of drone strikes. Firefighters continue to douse the fires sparked by Russian assaults. The attacks have injured numerous civilians, including children, and sparked widespread fires in the city, which is close to the Russian border.
It was horrible. The drones were buzzing overhead, fell and exploded. I didn't count how many were there. Maybe 15 or 20. There were a lot.
The enemy conducted 15 strikes on 2 civilian enterprises in Kharkiv's Kolodnohirsky district. Fires erupted on 1,500 square meters. One of the fires is being put out.
Kharkiv's mayor claims that Russian missiles have been used in double-tap strikes, targeting first responders in a residential area. A double-tap strike involves bombing a target, waiting a period of 5 to 20 minutes, often during which first responders arrive, and then bombing it again. Ukraine's military claims these actions constitute war crimes. Moscow has repeatedly denied targeting civilian targets. Ukrainian forces are launching counterattacks in the Belgorod region of Russia. According to reports, Ukrainian troops have penetrated Russia's first line of defense in the area and heavy fighting is underway. The region has been used by Russia to launch several attacks on Ukrainian frontline cities. This escalation comes as both sides complain to the US about strikes on energy sites, accusing each other of violating a partial ceasefire agreement. The situation remains volatile, with both military and diplomatic fronts experiencing heightened tensions. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
This are the consequences of the strike on the Russian field airfield on March 23rd, located in Ivnya, Belgorod region, approximately 60 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The strike was carried out using M30A2 rockets equipped with tungsten balls from the HIMARS MLRS. As a result of the strike, 4 Russian Aerospace Forces helicopters suffered critical damage, 2 Ka-52s and 2 Mi-8s.
Шестой керосин тоже льется по звуку. Так, разлет спереди. Да сейчас перезвоню, подождите. Где сама кассета, блядь? Керосин льется, блядь. Ебануться. Ну прямой прилет. В жопу. Угу. Лобысь прошибла. В жопу вошла. Так. Это 54-й.
Ukrainian defense forces destroyed a convoy of Russian armored vehicles in the Novo-Pavlivka sector. The soldiers of the 3rd Mechanized Battalion of the Separate Presidential Brigade and the 31st Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine participated in eliminating the enemy. The Presidential Brigade's press service published a video of the combat operation. The enemy decided to take advantage of unfavorable weather conditions for reconnaissance to launch an attack on Ukrainian positions. According to the defenders, the Russians sent 3 infantry fighting vehicles with infantry and a swarm of motorcycles for a breakthrough. The published footage also captures a destroyed enemy tank. But the Russians failed to catch our defenders off guard. Together with the 31st Mechanized Brigade, the convoy was stopped and burned, the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported. FPV drones were used to target Russian armored vehicles in a convoy moving along the highway. As a result of the hits, the enemy vehicles were stopped and disabled or abandoned by the Russians themselves. The immobilized vehicles were finished off with drones to ensure the enemy could not recover, repair, or return them to combat use. After a successful drone strike, the ammunition inside the Russian tank ignited. The flames from the burning propellant charges even erupted through the tank's cannon. It is unknown whether the crew was inside at the time. The Ukrainian defenders needed some more time to deal with the remnants of the enemy infantry, who scattered into the surrounding thickets. In the morning report, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated that on April 1st, in the Novo-Pavlivka direction, the Ukrainian Defense Forces repelled 8 enemy assaults near the settlements of Kostiantynivka and Rozliv. The Russians are aiming to capture the entire Donetsk region, so they do not spare their troops, constantly throwing them at Ukrainian positions. And they do not always hide behind armored vehicles, as they did this time. There have been numerous cases of the invaders using civilian cars, motorcycles, and electric scooters. At night, I work in air defense. By day, as a bomber. MiG-29 fighter pilot Denfix. Fighter pilot Denfix destroys 2 Shaheds in a single night combat mission. His aircraft is a MiG-29 frontline fighter. One of his tasks is to intercept and destroy Russian cruise missiles and attack drones. The pilot has more than 24 destroyed cruise missiles and UAVs to his credit. Several world leaders have held secret talks with Vladimir Putin, not just Orban and not Fico, claims the friend of the Russian dictator, Serbian President Vučić. He also states that he knows at least 2 of these leaders because his friends in the Kremlin told him about them. It would be interesting to see who they are. The United Kingdom will transfer Puma HC-2 helicopters to Ukraine, which were recently retired from service with the Royal Air Force. According to the information with which the media is in possession, the UK Ministry of Defence will transfer 8 to 10 Puma helicopters to Ukraine, which were decommissioned on April 31, 2025. The last place of service for these helicopters was the 33rd Squadron and the 230th Squadron Royal Air Force, which used their helicopters in East Asia. While in service with the Royal Air Force, the Puma helicopters were considered workhorses and were involved in all operations in which the United Kingdom participated, starting from 1971. After long-term service in the 2000s, a program to extend the service life and upgrade the helicopter systems began. In 2007, the Royal Air Force launched a program to extend the service life of its Pumas, known as the Life Extension Program. Initially, 28 HC.1 helicopters were planned for modernization, but eventually, only 24 were upgraded to the HC.2 standard. The improvements included the installation of more powerful Turbo Mecha Makila 1A1 engines, 1,800 horsepower each, upgrades to the avionics, including the installation of a glass cockpit, enhanced protection systems, and an increase in fuel capacity. Modernization was performed by Airbus Helicopters, formerly Eurocopter, and cost £260 million. By the end of March 2025, the helicopters were completely decommissioned from the Royal Air Force. On March 26th, the helicopters made a farewell flight over locations significant to their history. the Ministry of Defense of Portugal delivered 8 SA-330 Puma helicopters to Ukraine as part of a military assistance package.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Every day. We had a guy last week, it's 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.